From the New York Times, we have an interesting story. A few months before President Donald J. Trump was defeated for re-election, people around him, staff people, were considering using half the United States Army to smother the Mexican border with the largest deployment of American troops in the United States since the Civil War ended in 1865. In the spring of 2020, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, the Pentagon chief, was alarmed to learn of an idea under discussion at a top military command and a Department of Homeland Security to send as many as 250,000 troops, more than half the active U.S. Army, and a sixth of all American forces to the southern border in what would have been the largest use of the military inside the United States since the Civil War. With the coronavirus pandemic raging, Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's immigration agenda, had urged the Department of Homeland Security to develop a plan for the number of troops that would be needed to seal the 2,000-mile border with Mexico. It is not clear whether it was officials in the Department of Homeland Security or the Pentagon who concluded that a quarter of a million troops would be required. The concept was relayed to officials at the Defense Department's Northern Command, which is responsible for all military operations in the United States and on its borders, according to several former administration officials. Officials said the idea was never presented formally to Trump for approval, but it was discussed in meetings at the White House as they debated other options for closing the border to illegal immigration. They also closed it to legal immigration. That is to say, people who cross the border without permission to apply for asylum. Those people who turn themselves in so they could apply formally for asylum, that's legal. So they were legal. Esper declined to comment on the situation currently. But people familiar with these conversations who would speak about them only on condition of anonymity said he was enraged by Miller's plan. In addition, Department of Homeland Security officials had bypassed his office by taking the idea directly to military officials at Northern Command. That's a violation of the Constitution. You go through the chain of command. You want to talk to the American military command, you talk to the Secretary of Defense first. Esper also believed that deploying so many troops to the border would undermine U.S. military readiness around the world. Now, think about that for a minute. If you took 250,000 troops, active duty troops, and put them on the border, who would you replace them with? You'd have to call up the National Guard. And so our national defense then would depend on weekend warriors. Well, I was a weekend warrior for a long time, and that's not a bad idea if you're a weekend warrior because you'll be paid full time. But the defense of the United States certainly would suffer. After a brief but contentious confrontation with Miller in the Oval Office, Esper ended consideration of the idea at the Pentagon. I'd love to have been there for that yelling match. Trump had demanded a border wall with flesh-piercing spikes, repeatedly mused about moats filled with alligators, and asking about shooting migrants in the leg as they crossed the border. Yes, the non-military experienced President of the United States asked people if it was possible to train soldiers to shoot only at the legs of people crossing the border. His aides considered a heat ray that would make migrant skin feel hot. Around the same time that officials considered the deployment to the U.S. side of the border with Mexico, Trump pressed his top aides to send forces into Mexico itself to hunt drug cartels, much like U.S. commandos have tracked and killed terrorists in Afghanistan or Pakistan, officials said. Trump hesitated only after aides suggested that to most of the world, military raids inside Mexico could look like the United States was committing an act of war against one of its closest allies, which is also its biggest trading partner, officials say. In the end, rather than a deployment to the border, the Trump administration used an obscure public health rule, which remains in effect to this day, to deny asylum and effectively shut down entry into the United States from Mexico during the pandemic. But taken together, the ideas under discussion that spring underscore the Trump administration's view of the armed forces as a tool, a political tool that could be wielded on behalf of Trump's domestic political agenda in an election year. It further reveals the breach between Trump and his top military officials who worked behind the scenes to prevent what they viewed as the president's dangerous instincts. Several aides to the former president did not respond to a request for comment on this story. Trump's military commanders have said publicly that they repeatedly deflected the president's calls to send more troops to the border for years, telling him that armed forces were stretched thin and that legal arguments for using military units were flimsy. Let's talk some real politics. Vermont Senior Senator Patrick Leahy, who has been in the U.S. Senate for over 40 years, won't run for re-election. Now, Vermont's not a big state. It has one congressman, Peter Welch. He has now announced that he would run for the U.S. Senate seat held by his fellow Democrat, Senator Patrick Leahy, who announced last week he would not seek re-election in 2022. By the way, he's 81 years old. He's older than I am. Quote, "We are at a pivotal moment," Welch said in a statement. "Vermont's families are struggling through multiple crises, a global pandemic, the consequences of climate change, and a racial reckoning generations in the making. I believe there's less than 5% of the population of Vermont, it might even be less than that, is black or Hispanic." So I don't know what he's talking about. "The result of this election will determine control of the Senate, could determine control of the Senate, and with it, what we can accomplish for Vermont facilities," he said. His announcement comes as Democrats seek to hold control of the Senate, where they narrowly hold power, and Republicans only need to win, as I've said before, one seat in 2022, in the 2022 midterms, to regain control of the chamber. During the midterm elections, Republicans will be defending 20 seats and Democrats will be defending 14. Democrats are also seeking to maintain control of the House, where more than a dozen Democrats have announced plans to retire this year, next year. Welch was elected to Vermont's only seat in the House in 2006. He is chief deputy whip of the House Democratic Caucus. That means he's a pretty political guy and has pushed for energy reform. Washington Times reports Biden push for $2.5 billion tax break for lawyers spurs accusations of political payoff. Democrats paying off lawyers. Democrats have tucked a lucrative $2.5 billion tax break inside President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar social welfare bill that would benefit the trial lawyers' lobby, spurring Republican accusations of political back-scratching. The tax break allows trial lawyers working on a contingency basis, meaning they are paid only if a case is settled in their favor, to deduct expenses immediately. Such expenses include hourly labor fees and the expenses associated with waging a lawsuit, such as filing and deposition costs. On average, according to the American Bar Association, the fixed rate for contingency cases is anywhere between 33% and 40% of the total settlement payout. In some instances, the contingency fee can range upward of 50%. Given that legal costs have soared in recent years, the Joint Committee on Taxation estimates the write-off would cost taxpayers $2.5 billion over the next decade. Republican lawmakers argue that lucrative write-off is nothing more than a giveaway to the trial lawyers' lobby, which heavily underwrote Mr. Biden's presidential bid. Donors from the legal sector gave more than, get this, $274 million to Democrats in 2020, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Trial lawyers donated tens of millions to Joe Biden's campaign, says Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, a Republican. And now Biden's reckless spending plan includes $2.5 billion tax break for trial lawyers. What a coincidence. From CNN, we have this report. 1 year later, President Donald Trump's not secret attempt to steal the presidential election likely met its end Monday. It was a group of local officials, this was a year ago, doing their job in Michigan that ended it. General Services Administration ascertains Biden's victory. After the Michigan board certified President-elect Joe Biden's victory there, the Trump-appointed head of the GSA, the General Services Administration, ended her blockade and ascertained Biden's victory, unlocking funds for Biden to pay transition staff and work with the current government. Trump tweeted that he let Murphy go ahead, but he will continue to grouse and complain and allege wrongdoing where there is none. However, if Michigan's slate of Democratic electors are seated along with Georgia's, this thing is mathematically over. Pennsylvania and Nevada also certified their results on Tuesday, awarding the states combined 26 electoral votes to Biden, while North Carolina's state board voted to certify Trump's victory there, giving the president the state's 15 electors. The Electoral College meets December 14th. Remember, this article was from a year ago. The next administration is taking shape. Biden continues to build out his administration in waiting, making clear a large slate of key national security picks who will be charged with protecting American democracy and encouraging democracy worldwide. Interesting, in the past year, many of the appointments have been blocked by Republicans who just refuse to vote on them. So there's many offices in Washington, D.C., especially in national security, that are unfilled, that are vacant, or the duties are being performed by acting directors or acting officials. Biden's new diplomats can start their tenure next year by explaining to the world the scene of American democracy live streamed from Michigan's capital. A normally technical state government meeting strangely given huge national importance. Never before have the arcana, legalese, and fine print of a Mexican election law been so widely scrutinized as Trump desperately searching for holes and a way to taint or delay results in multiple states. Monday, however, was a great reminder that in this country, not even the political apparatus behind a hugely powerful U.S. president can influence a state election board. It was two parts Parks and Recreation, a TV program, and one part area of grievances. If you never spent time watching your city, town, or town council meeting, this is what it's like, no matter the subject. City election officials, county clerks, former Republican canvassers, and Michigan legal experts told members of the four-member bipartisan board that their duty was to certify the results, allowing audits and challenges to occur in court. The Michigan GOP argued the results should be delayed to give more review to Wayne County, that's Detroit, mostly black city in particular, pushing Trump's unfounded conspiracy theories. That those insidious claims found an audience in a Republican member of the Michigan Canvassing Board, despite the president's loss by more than 150,000 votes, was the latest ongoing drama of the after election. The Republicans eventually came around. When I stopped watching to write this newsletter, there were more than 500 people waiting to speak, and they were limiting each person to a minute and a half of speaking time. Final results, the two Democrats and one Republican voted to certify the results. So Trump will have to look for a new loophole. Well, he's been looking ever since and has lost every single court case that he's been involved in or his people have been involved in, with the exception of one which affected 200 ballots that arrived after 8 o'clock election night in Pennsylvania. So that was his big victory for his trying to stop the big steal. Hey, I'm Raul Lowry Contreras. This is the Contreras Report. I really am thankful that you're there. I'm thankful to TV of Tijuana and the CNR of Baja California, the cable company that runs us on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock. Thank you again for being there. We look forward to seeing you next week at this very same time in this very same place. Adios. Until next week.